But without further ado, I'd like to commence plenary one. I'll do so by giving over the floor to our moderator, Ms. Aggie Veres from the UNDP Crisis Bureau. She serves there as Deputy Director and Head of UNDP's Geneva office. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. It is my pleasure to be your moderator today for this first plenary session on enabled sectors, mine action as a foundation for sustainable development. Before we get started with the session, allow me to introduce this very distinguished panel. I believe we have not just a distinguished panel, but a set of very diverse perspectives that will help us guide through this session and understand more about the topic. First of all, on my left, it's Colonel Cletus Maregere, Director from Zimbabwe Mine Action Center. Colonel has a very extensive experience in mine action, explosive ordnance, having been involved in this field since 1990. And with a vast operational experience, having worked in the DRC and Mozambican campaigns, amongst many other positions, with a very vast experience for the discussion today. I'm also happy to welcome Dr. Stacey Pizzino from the University of Queensland, who is a researcher at the university specializing in the health, environmental and equity consequences of armed conflicts, disaster and climate-driven events, and she's going to share with us some very interesting findings through her research work. And then my dear colleague, Nuru Makital from the FAO, who has been covering various topics with FAO, 20 years professional experience in both technical and leadership roles, and with specific experience in the field in the DRC and Nigeria, the Sahel, that is very relevant for what we would like to cover today. And lastly, but not at least, our very good partner from the permanent mission of Japan, Mr. Yoshizane Ishii, the Deputy Permanent Representative, Minister, Head of Political and Social Affairs Division, who is not only coming here representing the permanent mission after a distinguished career in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but he's also with a vast experience because he was the Director of Arms Control and Disarmament prior to taking up his role. So thank you very much and welcome to all of you. So before we go to our panel, I just would like to set a little bit the scene for this discussion, for this particular panel. All of you know that mine action has been long in the focus as an urgent humanitarian imperative, saving lives, preventing injuries, and reducing fear. But we also know that the country level, where many of you work, we see that its value clearly goes beyond the clearance itself. Mine action unlocks land, restores mobility, and creates conditions for early recovery, peace building, and development. So in many contexts, it is not simply one activity among others or something that we need to get done before we can get to recovery, but it's really an enabling foundation that makes other investments possible and effective, and it also has a longer-term impact, as we will find out throughout the panel. Now, if you allow me to use my role as a moderator just to say a few words about how the UNDP engage in this field and put this into the constraints of the current funding and development landscape, because what we see is that mine action really must be grounded in national ownership, leadership, and in strengthening sustainable national institutions, so the countries can manage both the current contamination and the residual risk over time. So I know we have been focusing on this for years, not just UNDP as development agencies, but I think the imperative today is very, very clear. We need to have a broader planning framework. We need to make sure that humanitarian response plans, early recovery priorities, and national development strategies include and integrate mine actions so that land release translates into real outcomes: food security, access to services, livelihood, safe reconstruction, and community resilience. So that's why we are across diverse contexts. We have seen how integrated mine action accelerates the humanitarian development peace nexus and how we can link this to the broader transitions out of a crisis towards development pathways. So the purpose of the plenary, today's discussion will focus on the outcomes of mine action beyond clearance. Our distinguished panelists will showcase concrete success stories from the field that I think will allow us to see the breadth of impact, the breadth of importance, how we need to look beyond just the clearance when we're talking about mine action. So with that, I would like to turn to our first panelist, Colonel Maregere from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has an ambitious goal of becoming mine-free by 2030, while at the same time strengthening social cohesion, community resilience for the population that has been living with mine threat along the Mozambique-Zimbabwe border for decades. So we would be very interested for you to share some specific insights into how mine action has served as an enabler in this context for development. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I use the podium?
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will share the Zimbabwean story with you so that you realize how much we have gone beyond just mine clearance. You note that Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980. 46 years later, the country still faces landmine and unexploded ordnance threats emanating from the liberation struggle. While clearance has progressed, including completion of clearance in Manicaland and parts of Matabeleland North, Masvingo and Mashonaland provinces, demining is currently ongoing in Mashonaland Central, Mashonaland East, Masvingo and Matabeleland provinces. These gains, driven by partnerships between the Zimbabwe Mine Action Center and accredited demining operators, have made parts of the country landmine free, yet contamination continues to endanger lives and restrict access to key resources such as water, as well as education and health services, particularly in border areas with Mozambique and Zambia, where socio-economic development has been severely constrained. Zimbabwe has cleared to date about 97% of the confirmed contamination, and we remain with 3% to be cleared by our deadline of December 2030, though progress is challenged by donor fatigue and reduced funding. Under the Zimbabwe Mine Action Center, as the regulatory authority and supported by partners such as the Norwegian People's Aid, Allo Trust, and Mines Advisor Group, as well as the National Mine Clearance Unit, which is an army entity, the program under the theme One Humanity emphasizes that coordinated mine action is strategic investment in stability and human development, turning cleared land into real services and sustainable livelihoods and safe communities. Progress to date: as of 31 March 2026, the area cleared since independence amounts to 301.5 square kilometers, which translates to 97%. Remaining is 9.31 square kilometers, translating to 3%, and this has to be cleared up to 2030. Zimbabwe statistics through post-impact assessment surveys indicate that out of the released land, approximately 90% has been reclaimed for productive use by local beneficiaries. This is a clear indication that shows that our demining program has taken deliberate steps to align mine action with national development priorities, ensuring that the work we do directly contributes to improving livelihoods, strengthening food systems, and unlocking economic potential in previously inaccessible areas, socio-economic development and sustainable growth. The core of Zimbabwe's approach is strong national ownership. The elimination of landmines is a critical first step towards revitalizing the socio-economic landscape of Zimbabwe. With the reduction of risks, agricultural development and tourism opportunities have flourished, paving the way for job creation and sustainable growth. The journey towards a landmine-free Zimbabwe is a testament to the power of dedicated collaboration, illustrating how concerted efforts can create not just a safe environment, but a thriving community capable of overcoming historical challenges and building a prosperous future. This holistic approach underscores the importance of community empowerment in fostering resilience and improving the overall quality of life for residents of Zimbabwe. Beyond clearance, transformative outcomes and for communities. While clearance remains a critical function, the real impact of our work lies in what happens after the land is cleared safe. These outcomes demonstrate that mine action is not just about removing landmines. It is also about restoring opportunities and dignity. Firstly, restored agricultural production. Zimbabwe's economy is largely agro-based, relying on both crop production and animal husbandry. Landmine clearance has allowed communities, especially along Zimbabwe's northeastern and eastern borders, to reclaim fertile land that had been previously contaminated. As a result, food security and household incomes have improved. About 30% of surveyed households are now using former mine-affected land for crop production and livestock grazing, and an average of land that is now being used has increased from 0.5 hectares per family to more than 3 hectares after clearance. In addition, 70% of households report expanded grazing areas with fewer or no livestock losses compared to the landmine period. After the clearance of the Sheba Forest minefield, the area shifted from danger to opportunity, enabling communities and nearby estates to resume harvesting timber. This improved safety, movement, and socio-economic development, supporting progress towards key sustainable development goals, number 2, number 3, as well as number 4, as well as strengthening long-term stability. In the border region of Bema Valley, the border between Zimbabwe and Mozambique, the establishment of a peanut butter manufacturing plant also helped to sustain productive agricultural land. Facilitation of tourism. Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe is one of the 7 wonders of the world and was recently adjudged by the Forbes magazine as the best tourism destination for 2025. Prior to the commencement of demining efforts in 1998, Victoria Falls town was encircled by a minefield and could not expand. Following the successful clearance of the 220-kilometer Victoria Falls to Mulivi's minefield, Victoria Falls witnessed a tourism boom as the town witnessed numerous infrastructural developments in once mined areas. Currently, a multi-purpose mega sporting facility is nearing completion in the Masue area, and the facility is earmarked to host the 2027 Men's Cricket World Cup featuring 14 teams to be co-hosted by Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Namibia. The hosting of these games will go a long way in boosting tourism in Victoria Falls. Once mined areas in Masue have also been designated as special economic zones, paving way for economic development. On the other hand, the completion of the Sango border post to Crook's Corner minefield will result in a tourism boom in the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, an initiative which connects Konarejo National Park in Zimbabwe, Kruger National Park in South Africa, and Limpopo National Park in Mozambique, creating one of the biggest animal sanctuaries in Africa. The economic benefits attached to this mega project are massive. Improved access to essential services. Cleared areas have allowed the rehabilitation of water points, the reopening of schools, and improved access to healthcare facilities. Clearance has also restored access to essential services and agriculture. Around 75% of respondents through the post-impact assessment surveys reported improved access to schools, clinics, water points, and markets. Children are now able to attend school more safely and regularly, aid their livestock, as well as accessing health and welfare services without the fear of losing limbs or lives. The District Development Fund repaired a link road to Mozambique so that children could use safer paths to attend primary school, and also Mazonwe Secondary School and women gained reliable access to maternal and child health services at Mazonwe Clinic. Then strengthening community resilience and human security. Mine action activities in Zimbabwe also played a pivotal role in enhancing human security and community resilience through improving livelihoods, as reflected in post-impact assessment survey results. By removing landmines, we restore freedom of movement, allowing communities to safely engage in farming, grazing, and daily activities without the fear of losing their limbs and lives. This directly improves the quality of life as well as social cohesion. We deliberately target certain cleared areas for drilling of boreholes and establishment of nutrition gardens, which operate as community business units, thus sustaining livelihoods. Furthermore, Zimbabwe's demining program promotes community involvement and inclusion, ensuring that the affected communities, the minority and the vulnerable groups, as well as people living with disabilities, are part of decision-making processes. This sustainable participatory approach empowers communities and strengthens their capacity to manage future challenges post-demining period. In this way, mine action becomes a driver of resilience, supporting not only immediate safety, but long-term stability and recovery. I will jump the aspect of strategic partnerships. Strategies towards a mine-free country. Zimbabwe will strengthen the sustainability of mine action by innovating financing models and mainstreaming mine action into the national budgeting cycle, supported by ongoing national stakeholder dialogues that regularly share progress and challenges and engage donors through side events to encourage and continue funding. It will also mobilize domestic resources for both land release and post-clearance development by linking mine action outputs to national and local development frameworks such as agriculture, infrastructure rehabilitation, resettlement, livelihood recovery through coordinated support from local authorities and relevant government departments. As clearance targets are approached, government will enhance responses to residual contamination by engaging explosive hazards by equipping the National Mine Clearance Unit. Additionally, at provincial and district levels, the government will enhance nationwide explosive ordnance response capacity by engineer field squadrons, ensuring that they are fully prepared to undertake and coordinate explosive ordnance call-outs on rapid response basis. In conclusion, the journey towards a landmine-free Zimbabwe is a source of hope and resilience for communities affected by landmines. Through the government of Zimbabwe's leadership, supported by the donor community and dedicated international and national operators, mine action in Zimbabwe has resulted in large areas being cleared of landmines and livelihoods for communities restored and improved. The continued reduction in casualties and injuries is a direct result of robust implementation of extensive explosive ordnance risk education activities in affected areas, prompting a culture of safety and awareness. Our demining exploits have restored the dignity of our people, especially rural communities, with land now available for agriculture, construction of schools and clinics, drilling of boreholes, and establishment of nutrition gardens. On the economic front, cleared land is now available and accessible for improved tourism growth and economic benefits, therein give impetus to national growth. Continued investment in mine action is essential to maintain these gains and protect future generations. Overall, the progress made so far by Zimbabwe is the result of honest hard work anchored on strong national ownership, collaboration, and commitment to rebuild a safer future for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Colonel Maregere, for this very comprehensive view of the experience of Zimbabwe. I think this gave us a very good explanation of what we mean when we say integrated, because the connection between the social, economic, and the longer-term health, environmental impact is coming through from the example. This is also a good segue, then, if I may turn to Dr. Pizzino, understanding a little bit the connections on the longer-term impacts. I think we are all seeing it as a disturbing fact that the Solomon Islands explosive ordnance from World War II is still impacting communities more than 80 years after the conflict ended. So you have done some very interesting research in the Solomon Islands to better understand the health implications for the islanders as they have been coexisting with an extensive explosive ordnance contamination for 8 decades. So if I may ask you, first of all, in the context of this conversation, we often focus on the immediate humanitarian impact for the explosive ordnance. So from a public health perspective, what is that we are missing?
Thank you. I think we're all very familiar with the immediate impacts, and they are devastating. The mortality study that I led previous to this work used data across 17 countries and just over 100,000 casualties. And that work found in low resource settings that nearly 4 in 10 people injured by explosive ordnance die from those injuries. And that's exceptionally high, and it's higher than the figures that we often discuss. And that statistic tells us, how lethal these weapons are. But from a public health perspective, there's longer and less visible impacts that receive less attention, especially if we consider, what happens beyond that moment of explosion. Explosive ordnance doesn't stop harming people when it doesn't explode. So long after conflicts, it remains embedded in landscapes, and over time it corrodes. And as this happens, toxic substances are released into soil, water, dust, and potentially into food systems. And these substances, they don't stay put. So they move through environmental processes, rainfall, flooding, erosion, storms, and they shift into places where people are farming. It's where people are living, they fish, where they're raising their children. And so the risk shifts from something sudden and visible into something that's more chronic and cumulative. And so from a health perspective, this means exposure isn't happening through a single traumatic event, but through everyday life, through drinking water, harvesting food, working land. And over time, that chronic exposure, it can undermine health, nutrition, productivity, and resilience. The very foundations that communities rely on to recover and remain stable. And so I think if we only count, explosions, mortality, and injuries, we systematically underestimate the true burden of explosive ordnance on communities and on development.
Thank you. So based on this narrative that you just also explained to us, how does environmental health strengthen the case for mine action as a foundation for sustainable development?
So environmental health, I think, it helps clarify why mine action is foundational and not supportive, not just supportive of sustainable development. And the Solomon Islands is a very clear example. So more than 80 years on from the end of the Second World War, unexploded ordnance, remains embedded in soil, rivers, mangroves, and coastal reefs. And these are exactly the places where communities are living, where they're farming and fishing. And those communities have been reporting illnesses. So we went in, we applied an environmental and a public health lens to ask whether that exposure could be occurring through UXO. So my team undertook pilot research, which was commissioned by UNDP and funded by the government of Japan. And we combined community consultations with environmental sampling, lab analysis, geospatial analysis, and other methods. And what we found is important. So, for example, elevated lead levels were identified in soil and in fine particulate matter, so in the dust that was associated with UXO. And that included material that children are known to handle and to play with on a day-to-day basis. In these settings, we're seeing daily interactions with UXO. So children are playing with them, they're used as anchors in the canoes, they're embedded in the reefs where people are fishing. And in another finding from this work, we found residues that are consistent with military explosives, so PETN, were detected in bivalves, so in clams that we purchased from a local market. And that points to a potential, food chain pathway. And I'm not saying here that there's a food security emergency, but I am saying that this is a signal that this pathway exists. And these findings, they don't tell us everything, but they can help explain how exposure can occur without explosions, through play, through water, and through livelihoods. And so for development, I think the implication is simple. When environmental risk, remains unresolved, the confidence in land, in fisheries, and livelihoods, that stays fragile. And I think that's why mine action, it works best when it's integrated into environmental management, climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and development planning. And so those risks from past conflicts don't continue to undermine future recovery. And so to bring this out of the abstract and more into lived experience, I want to briefly share a short video from Solomon Islands. And it shows the everyday environments we've been talking about. So the land, the water, and how unexploded ordnance continues to shape daily life and recovery, decades after the conflicts ended.
Going around in this area and everywhere around, and bomb is laid here around it. It's very dangerous for us.
What we found is that old World War II bombs are slowly breaking down and they're releasing harmful substances into soil, water, dust, and nearby ecosystems, including coral reefs and coastal environments.
The woman picking the shell in the maguru, then people eating. And they're fighting that is the poison. Some feeling of body pain and irate, vomit, and also the body weak.
And climate change can make this harder. So heavy rain, floods, storms, erosion, it can expose old ordnance and move contamination into reefs and other areas that people depend on.
A challenge now for making a place for him is safe for communities. I think I need for community for work together with him UOT team from RSIP for removing water remains here.
Even though it may take many years to completely remove the re-exhaust, we can immediately start prevention of damages or injuries resulting from UXOs by educating the public, especially those living near the UXOs.
We have to working together to take out or taking out the bomb from here so that we need in a different part to sustaining living here.
Thank you very much for that example. And perhaps if very shortly you can just point to a few specific ways how longer-term environmental and health impact change development outcomes around the world.
So I think sustainable development, it depends on predictability in the land, water, and ecosystems. So when explosive ordnance, leaves unresolved environmental risk behind, I think that predictability breaks down. And so from a public health perspective, that risk doesn't have to be dramatic to be consequential. Chronic environmental uncertainty, it shapes everyday decisions over time. What food is harvested, what water is sourced, and which livelihoods are viable. And those patterns can quietly affect, nutrition, health, economic opportunity. And I think that's why mine action, it matters for sustainable development, not because it's, just reopening access, but because it's reducing that uncertainty. So when communities can, trust their land, water and surrounding environment, I think planning becomes more possible and recovery is, more likely to be durable as opposed to fragile.
Thank you very much. I know there's a lot to discuss on this topic, but maybe if we can just zoom in on the replicability of this experience, if we can expect these results of this replicated in other countries in similar contexts.
So the Solomon Islands study, it doesn't suggest that there's going to be identical levels or pathways present everywhere. Environmental risk is shaped by context, so by the climate, geology, conflict history, the types of munitions, and how communities are interacting with their environment. But what is likely to be replicable is the mechanisms. So when explosive ordnance remains embedded in land and in marine environments over long periods, when that corrosion is occurring, and when people are relying closely on local soils, waters, food systems, the conditions for that environmental exposure are present. And these conditions, they exist in many contaminated settings, so tropical, coastal, riverine, flood-prone regions, and in places where livelihoods, depend on agriculture, fisheries, informal land use. And so what our study, demonstrates is not likely to be a unique case, and it's a plausible and evidence-informed framework for understanding risk beyond blast injury. And it shows how those environmental processes can translate legacy ordnance into everyday exposure pathways through dust, play, potentially food and water. And this means those risks may be present elsewhere, but they will not necessarily be visible unless we look for them. And I think that's why replication, shouldn't be repeating the exact same measurements, but repeating this framework. So rather applying this, an integrated environmental and public health lens that's tailored to local conditions. And I think from a policy perspective, that strengthens the case for incorporating environmental health assessment into mine action where appropriate. Not as an added burden, but as a way of ensuring that clearance, fully supports health, fully supports livelihoods and long-term development.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing the study and the relevance for other similar contexts. I think this is exactly what we need to underpin with data, the notion that the impact really goes beyond just clearing the mines. With that, if I can talk to you, turn to you, Mr. Tal from FAO. FAO's priority is food security, agriculture, land and natural resource management, and rural livelihoods. So could you explain to us a little bit why you, from the organization's perspective, think that investment in mine action is a strategic entry point for these areas?
Thank you, Aggie. I think the subject of today, the zero hunger perspective, is really at the heart of FAO's work. In heavily contaminated contexts, clearing mines and explosive ordnances is a precondition, an enabler for resuming safely agriculture and food production. But also it's a way to revamp, let's say, the agri-food, the value chains, the different agriculture value chain. So investing in mine action should not be seen as an isolated intervention, but also as a strategic investment to unlock safe agriculture recovery and food production. I think this was highlighted by the previous speakers in the opening and my colleagues in the panel. If you look at the case of Ukraine, 91% of the land released is agricultural land. If you on top of that, 100% of the land for demining under the government compensation plan is also farmland. So it shows that if you do only, you need a continuum, the nexus between, let's say, clearance or land release and agriculture investment. If we take the case of Syria, one key statistic is 62% of the victims are related to agriculture-based livelihoods. It means that people are going to farm or to try to get some means of livelihood, and they are victim of landmines. So there is really a correlation between the two. I had the chance because Mrs. Mariam is from Borno. I worked 2.5 years in Borno, so I witnessed it firsthand what she is talking about. Because in Borno, when we started the program there, you cannot go out of the local government areas. You have a radius of 2 kilometers where you can intervene. After that, you cannot move. I think the colonel also talked about Zimbabwe. So there is really a correlation between food security and mine action. So addressing explosive ordnance contamination is essential to create, let's say, a safe space for investing in agriculture recovery. And I think a good example is the Syria. You were moderating the SNPW on Syria, and I think if you look at the Syria agriculture recovery strategy, one key enabler is mine action. Without mine action, you cannot, let's say, have this recovery strategy moving forward. So our ambition as FAO is really to have this mine action and food security nexus, but working closely with different partners, the UN, private sector, DICHD, and the government at the heart, as you said in your intervention.
Thank you very much. I mean, just following up on some of these points, the challenge is often how do we connect evidence to action? So from your perspective, how we can better measure and incentivize the impact of land release, agriculture, food production, to really inform this evidence-based planning and resource allocation so that decisions made are better tied to the evidence on the ground?
Yes, indeed. I think in his opening remarks, Ambassador Tobias reminded us that mine action output should not be only reported in terms of square meters cleared or released. I think this is really key. So reporting on surfaces alone is not enough. We should be able to show, let's say, how this is contributing to, let's say, the zero hunger outcomes. You have 11 indicators when you look at the SDG 2. And you have simple indicators that can be, let's say, measured, like food production, sustainable agriculture, and what is the effect on nutrition. What he was referring, I think someone was referring to a people-centered approach, not only about, surface measure. So key simple questions are, let's say, are farmers planting again? How much food have we produced? What is the economic value of this production? I think this is some simple question that we can answer. And in this framework, FAO has developed in Ukraine a methodology. So to go, let's say, from land release output to agriculture outcomes. Our methodology has 5 steps. The first one is mapping the released land. We are using the information management system for mine action of the data portal of Ukraine to identify where and when agricultural land was released. So this is the first step. The second step is to track cultivation. We are using satellite imagery to see if and when cultivation started after clearance. So this is the second step. And the third step is about measuring the crop production. So we are using, let's say, satellite imagery, remote sensing, and also we are prudent. We are, let's say, having a kind of average yield assumptions, to 80%, not the 100%, to measure the crop production. And the fourth step is really about the value of the production. We are using the market prices to really estimate what is the value of the production. And this is leading us to the final step, which is being able to measure what we are calling the return on investment, meaning that compare crop value to clearance cost to estimate the return and the payback period. I think this is really key. So what does it mean concretely in terms of result? In Ukraine, by October 2025, over 3,500 hectares of farmland were released in Kharkiv and Mykolaiv. With 80% recultivated, this has generated, let's say, this generated 3,200,000 tons of wheat and 2,800 tons of sunflower. This is, let's say, gross figures. But in terms of, let's say, if you want to put it at something tangible at a people level, let's say, it is the 5 million of loaves of bread and 1.2 million liters of oil. This is what, I think this is what is behind the figures. But what is also important here is we were able to estimate the cost, let's say the return on investment, meaning how many years does it take to, let's say, to recover the cost of the clearance cost. For, let's say, wheat, it's 1.5 years. If it is sunflower, it is 1 year because the yield is better and the price is more interesting. And 1.4 year for maize. We are trying also to see what is the ability of a farmer to repay if, as a private farmer. It will take maybe 3 to 7 years. I think this is some data that can help, let's say, to shape some policy recommendation for even a public-private partnership, or, you know, because maybe the government is not maybe able to do everything by its own. So I think the evidence really help us to measure the contribution of mine action, let's say, to SDG 2, but also it can help also to strengthen the funding case. You know, with figures you can really also discuss more with the donors and the government to explain why you should invest, let's say, $1 in mine action.
No, thank you very much. That's very clear. And I think, you know, this is exactly the kind of data that we need to perhaps communicate better, because it's not just abstract numbers. This is really about food on the table, economic benefit, and it links back to the case of Zimbabwe, where it was also very clear that the economic benefit is clearly linked to some of these areas. So lastly, maybe if you can just step out of the very specifics and give us an idea of how can mine action be more systematically integrated into the agricultural recovery? What do we need to do there?
I think the first point is really for us to work together. You know, we are sometimes in different worlds. We are working in silos. So first is really at the outset we should prioritize together, meaning that use agriculture expertise to prioritize productive resources and infrastructure, such as irrigation systems, you know, federal roads, the wells, where we can maximize the impact on food security. I think this is the first point. The second point is really to have also in mind the continuum, meaning that also integrating an agriculture support package after the clearance. So we need to really combine clearance with immediate agriculture inputs, training, and financial support, because also they need to a kind of buffer. And third point, maybe to strengthen coordination. We are, I think, working with GICHD, UNMAS in many areas where we would like to put have integrated platform or integrated framework where we can plan together. Because if we can use, let's say, the agriculture planning alongside, let's say, mine action planning, we can have more integrated action together. And I will say, final point, to have evidence for, you know, being able to advocate more for this kind of approach.
Thank you very much. I think this is very clear and very tangible and really helps us understand the connections between the different areas. Timeframes matter. It does matter when and how we act on the ground on this. The government of Japan is one of the largest financial supporters to humanitarian mine action and a champion globally in linking mine action to the humanitarian development and peace nexus. And of course, as a development organization, alongside with many of our partners, UNDP is very grateful for this holistic approach from Japan and willing to use mine action strategically as an enabler for wider support for debris management and then moving to reconstruction. So, Mr. Ishii, if you could shed some light for us on the Japanese mine action strategy and some concrete examples of where and how Japan have successfully supported mine action as an enabler for this wider spectrum. Over to you.
Aji, thank you so much for having me here. And I think I have to start by thanking the organizers here today, MAS, GCHD, for organizing this whole event, and UNDP for the plenary, having us here, and also I mustn't forget the Swiss government for doing this. I'm very, very pleased and encouraged by the outcome today and the enthusiasm here, because this is one of the areas that is really dear for the government of Japan. I would also like to pay tribute to those who are in the field actually doing the demining action, those affected by communities and struggling today, because it's a topic that doesn't, relent, and it's something that we continuously have to engage. I come here as a donor, of course, and as a donor, I think my fellow other countries or colleagues would probably agree with me that this is a very, very challenging environment for donors today. We all know there's more war and conflict, and then there's, I think the number of refugees and internally displaced people have surpassed the 120 million mark. And while, the significance of, adopting the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention in 1999, we've done quite a lot and made a lot of progress. Explosive ordnance still pose a real threat to human security and the people that are affected in the communities. So as donors, we right now are also, challenged by the idea that we need more security. So most of the funds is a big challenge to meet the demands of security, and also finding means and ways to do what we have to do, what we can in humanitarian space and development. But that's why I'm actually quite pleased today that I can affirm Japan's long-standing commitment to mine action, and not only as a humanitarian imperative, but key driver for stability and development. And it's anchored in this idea of human security. I don't know whether security has a very good connotation today, but human security has been at the core of our thinking for a very long time. And we believe that in something called the humanitarian development nexus, that we don't stay in humanitarian, that we move on from humanitarian to development and peace. That is what we believe in when we engage with our activities as donors. As donors, we've been doing quite a lot, but ever since 1997, when Tokyo Conference on Anti-Personnel Landmines, we have extended quite substantial support for humanitarian mine action, and in 2025, last year, Japan extended approximately $80 million to 23 countries and regions, and we wish to reinforce its role as a major contributor in this field. So we are in the middle of trying to actually implement our ideals of the HDP nexus. So in the GRF, or Global Refugee Forum in 2023, we launched the HDP multi-stakeholder pledge. And since February 2024, we have held 6 major roundtables, which have resulted in commitment from 9 governments, 17 organizations, including ILO, OECD, and UNESCO. So we want to make sure that this issue of HDP nexus is realized, and as bedrock is obviously demining, because we all know that development cannot begin until land is safe, and mine action is the foundation of recovery and development. So as we, as Ambassador, I think, I got from Tobias or Privatelli was here saying, We also think that it's very important that we don't forget that it's the communities and the ownership of the government is very, very important. So we have also bear that in mind and announced in 2024 something called the Comprehensive Package of Assistance to Humanitarian Mine Action. And it's not just about life-saving clearance activities, but it also promotes reconstruction, socio-economic recovery, and also strengthens national ownership and institutional capacity. So we want to go beyond just mine clearance, like our fellow panelists have been saying. And we know that we have to get there to agriculture and tourism, and that's the way that we can keep faith and we can realize that mine action is the bedrock of development and delay. So I would like to also mention that in particular, Japan has something called the Japan International Cooperation Agency. People know it as JICA. And they've been championing and committed to strengthening national ownership and building local capacity by leveraging expertise cultivated through past cooperation activities. I think most people in this room that know that we promote South-South triangular cooperation to facilitate knowledge sharing amongst affected countries, especially the one in Cambodia CMAC is very renowned. And local capacity building and mine action was a priority of themes during Japan's presidency for the 22nd meeting of Straight Parties to Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention. So what are we thinking about going forward? I think we are, quite cognizant that mine action is a vital life-saving initiative and key enabler across multiple sectors. In partnership with UNMAS and FAO, we will continue to engage in clearance activities to enable communities to return to farming and rehabilitation irrigation systems. Japan will cooperate with the Syrian Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Emergency and Disaster Management to address the threats posed by explosive ordnance and contamination and agriculture degradation in Aleppo, Hama, Idlib, where agriculture remains essential for recovery and resilience of millions of Syrians. And we have, I think, a real chance, opportunity here in Syria. And this has to be the start of how Syrians can get back to everyday life without fear of going to the fields and so forth. Obviously, we have a colonel from Zimbabwe, but Japan is also working with Zimbabwe's ZMAC and the Ministry of Agriculture to carry out landmine removal and implementation of agricultural development in mine-affected areas of northern Zimbabwe. So Japan, carefully sequences clearance of infrastructure rehabilitation to ensure immediate and effective use of released land. But I'd be really remiss to not mention a few things about things that are not so much talked about today. That is, I think, perhaps gender or WPS. Because we know that many speakers have mentioned that, that explosive orders does not discriminate against victims, but we know that it disproportionately affects people, especially children and women it's quite notable. So we would like to further look into the synergies between mine action and WPS agenda. And in Syria, in collaboration with the UNDP, Japan will help provide secure, inclusive facilities that enable women, deminers, to participate safely in operations and capacity building activities, operational efficiency, and sustained workforce motivation. I've been quite encouraged by the recent GIHCD's progress in help in Sri Lanka, because I used to be a desk officer in Ministry of Japan on looking after Sri Lanka as well. And in those days, it was still in the middle of a civil war. We're talking about the dividends of peace and so forth. So it's been quite a while since then, and we really like to see progress on demining and getting back to normality. Going back to the WPS and gender, a more recent example of mine action as named labor is also in Afghanistan. And here, partnership with UNOPS and local partners. And this has contributed to releasing conflicted, affected land for productive use and community resilience. And by clearing land and providing explosive ordnance risk education, the project has helped release about 9 million square meters of land. And this has enabled the rehabilitation of vital irrigation canals and roads, creating 6,300 work days for local laborers. And here, if you could allow me to indulge a little bit of a short video about the project, this project titled Emergency Returnee Assistance Through Integrated Mine Action and Improvement of Community Infrastructure. Could I ask for a short video, if that's all right?
For this project, UNOPS focused on 5 of the most affected villages in eastern Afghanistan. We verified 56 cases of residents killed or left with life-altering disabilities. Many families had only just returned from years of exile, hoping to rebuild their lives, only to find their land unusable. Over 6 months, 4 demining teams worked tirelessly in harsh weather and rugged mountainous terrain with patience and precision. Deminers checked every inch of land to ensure communities could return safely. Our clearance teams safely destroyed 243 explosive hazards, securing nearly 4.6 million square meters of land for productive use. We also successfully released an additional 4.3 square kilometers of suspected hazardous land without the need for physical clearance.
و هدف اصلی ما همی است که اطلاعات و معلومات همین مهاجرین بالا بروه و تعداد حادثات اینا کم شود و سلوکی بد مردم به سلوکی نیک تبدیل شود.
من الله موږ به کبان نه راټولو دلته د خیمه کې د موږ دا زده کړل د ماینونو عکسونه مو لیدل.
Beyond clearance and risk education, we restored over 14 kilometers of roads and 19 kilometers of vital irrigation canals. These infrastructure projects generated 6,300 labor days, providing a lifeline for families in an area where employment opportunities are extremely limited.
This project is about results. It's about impact. It's about supporting most vulnerable communities deal with the deadly legacy of war. It also shows us how mine action has this fantastic feature of saving lives, but also enabling development, enabling critical infrastructure, enabling mobility, agriculture activity, safety, and livelihoods.
The Massey project exemplifies how targeted mine action serves as the essential prerequisite to sustainable development and a fundamental step to restore human dignity and enable progress. By integrating mine action with community infrastructure, we've moved beyond traditional silos, demonstrating a pilot model that is as efficient as it is impactful.
Thank you for your patience. Well, I'd like to perhaps conclude by saying it is very difficult for a donor these days, but for Japan, mine action is very, very important. And part of it comes from the fact that after the war, the Second World War, we've been a peace-loving nation, and we've walked this path through peace. So for peace, I think, first we have to have the HDP nexus, and we have to be able to make sure the communities get back on their feet. and thrive and develop. So this is where we're coming from. So we will recommit ourselves to mine action. But as we all know, we all have to, as many have said, it's not just the donors, the ownership is very, very important. NGOs, civil society, we're all in this together. So I've learned a lot from my fellow panelists today, and I'm very grateful for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that experience and for all the support that Japan is providing for this area. In the interest of time, I will not try to sum up or make a reflection too much on the panel's interventions. We've all heard it, and I think it's an extremely useful and diverse experience. We have a little bit of time, not too much, but perhaps we can get a couple of reflections from the floor there. First of all, I really would like to invite Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister of Economy, Environment and Agriculture, Mr. Ihor Beskaravavny, to perhaps give a very short reflection on what you've heard. And then if we have time, maybe we can bring in a couple more comments. Thank you.
No, it's not. Oh, yeah, no, it's working. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Veres and distinguished delegates, colleagues. Over 130,000 square kilometers, nearly a quarter of our country, remains potentially contaminated, and thousands of people continue to live in affected areas. I say this to make one point clear. For Ukraine, demining is a precedent for everything else. It's step zero. Without it, it's no agriculture, is recovery, no return to displaced people, no reconstruction, and also no sustainable development. This session is about mine action as a foundation for development, and our national mine action strategy reflects this directly and connect clearance with recovery priorities. Let me give one example. In Ukraine, we are linking mine action with agricultural recovery. Using data-driven prioritization system, we identify contaminated land plots where clearance will bring highest economic and social impact and prioritize them first. But today I want to speak about something that matters as much as the technical work itself, and it's about partnership. We have seen that scale of contamination in Ukraine is too large. The challenges are too complex. We need strong, sustainable dialogue and cooperation between mine-affected countries. Not just with donors, partners, we need cooperation between mine-affected countries. Ukraine is fully open to this dialogue. We want to learn from others, and we are ready to share what we have learned ourselves. At the same time, I want to raise a point that I believe matters for all of us in this room. Every country is different because of geography, contamination, institution, culture, tradition. What works is one context will not automatically work in another. International support is most effective when it's shaped around local needs and continued with local and coordinated with local authorities. Effective mine action must be grounded in a national ownership. Our approach must reflect the reality on the ground in each specific country. Safe lands is the foundation of recovery, and we will continue to work with our partners to make it possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think it was really good after the panel that you brought in the partnership element, which is extremely important, and that you pressed also on the contextual nature of this work. It's not just a simple replication of good experience, but it's really to fit into the context of the country with the local needs and local ownership. So I have a very hard task here to balance whether we give the last word to the panel or open to the floor in 5 minutes, but perhaps just to have very, very short reflections from two participants, then we could try to do that. I don't see your name tag, but the gentleman in the back there. But if you could keep it under 1 minute, please, that would be really great. Please go ahead.
Merci. Monsieur le Président, chers panélistes, je m'appelle Abdurrahman Ba. Je suis chef de projet de déminage humanitaire pour handicap international au Sénégal. En Casamance, dans le sud du Sénégal, là-bas, le déminage humanitaire est une...
I think the mic got... No, we hear you.
C'est bon. Oui, je disais en Casamance, le déminage humanitaire est une condition préalable au retour des populations qui ont abandonné le travail depuis parfois plus de 30 ans. ACHI y a développé une approche dite intégrée. Avec nos partenaires, nous associons le déminage à l'éducation aux risques, à l'assistance aux victimes, à la relance économique et à la prévention des conflits. Les résultats sont concrets, tangibles et positifs. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes proches de l'objectif 0 mine d'ici 2031. C'est un objectif réaliste, mais à mesure que nous approchons de la phase finale, il devient plus difficile de mobiliser les partenaires techniques et financiers pour soutenir cet effort des derniers mètres carrés. Ma question est la suivante. Si les approches intégrées prouvent leur efficacité sur le terrain, il est souvent difficile de trouver des ressources de financement suffisantes pour les mettre en œuvre. Comment pensez-vous que le secteur puisse évoluer en ce sens, et particulièrement pour les pays proches de leurs engagements vis-à-vis de la Convention du traité d'Ottawa? Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour votre remarque. And with that, if you allow me, I'm just going to, I don't see any other hands. So in the interest of time, to keep with the spirit of the conference, let me just close out with 4 quick points. I think what we heard is very clear that first, mine action is an enabler. It's really in many contexts a precondition for early recovery and what comes after in assistance, peace building and so forth. But it also needs to look towards the longer term impacts. Second, I think that was very clear from the example of Zimbabwe, and my colleague Nuru from FAO emphasized that the largest results also come when it's integrated into a broader context, planning, financing framework, sectoral approaches, and really an integration of various actors addressing the different elements coming together. And third, which I think from the DPR we heard very clearly, that the humanitarian development peace nexus is not an abstract concept here. We heard how mine action helps communities to move from immediate protection needs on to rebuilding their lives. And this is really an important element. It's to make sure that they can do that. As the colonel said at the beginning, not only moving landmines, but restoring opportunities with dignity that we also need to bring back. And finally, partnerships and the predictable financing is very decisive. So cross-sectoral collaboration, not just across those who are supporting this, but across governments, UN entities, civil society, and other partners, and especially the role of the private sector that we need to look at. This will allow us to really demonstrate the better results and share this experience across the board so that we can really use mine action as an enabler and really as a driver to transition out of these immediate response and complex crisis contexts. So with that, allow me to thank the panelists again for your absolutely wonderful contributions, and my apologies that we did not have more time for a conversation, but I hope that for the rest of the conference we will be able to do that. Thank you very much.